So, it is 5 o'clock, and I'd like to call the 23rd of January 2024 meeting of the Plymouth Village Water and Sewer District to order. Let's begin, please, with a Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're going to briefly approve meeting minutes and payroll, then move on to our hearings. If I have a motion, please, to approve the meetings from January 10th that we have all reviewed.
I'll make a motion to approve them.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, likewise, motion for payroll and manifest, please.
Make a motion we approve the payroll manifest.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, both motions pass. So at a couple minutes past the hour, I'd like to open the 2024 budget hearing. And first up, just like to say briefly that we've been working on a new rate now for 4 years. We wanted to get this right, but also we could have never anticipated all the things that happened during this period. COVID, inflation, huge inflation, and and other factors. The great rise in the cost of construction. It's been a lot to consider in changing our rates. For those who want the briefest of brief notes on what's going on rate-wise, I think it's first worthwhile to note that there's no simple answer. Our rates are made up of a couple of components, mainly the base rate and then the variable rate, which is how many gallons of water you use. We're also introducing another key factor, which is fire suppression this time around. So there's a couple of factors going in. We can kind of generally say that the average residential consumer will see in the next year about a 5% increase in their rates. We haven't done any rate increases in 4 years. This is the first time around that we're getting to it, and we feel like that's essential to cover our debt for the ongoing work that we're doing to improve the infrastructure in the district. So with that, I'd like to turn over the presentation to David Fox of Raftellus, who we're very grateful to have had as a consultant on this project of ours, giving us some detailed answers to what's going on rate-wise.
Great, thank you. Would it be better if I sat there or stand here? Does anybody have a preference?
How does it tape? Whatever way it comes out best on the screen.
Well, you're going to be presenting what's on the screen, correct? So it's probably better that you're there.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
Sat
Okay.
for 2 hours, so I'm good standing. Everybody's okay with that.
Excellent.
I just wanted to make sure. Good evening, my name is Dave Fox. I'm the Vice President with Raftellus. Raftellus is the largest firm in the country, predominantly focused on financial pricing and management consulting services for the utility industry with a strong focus on water and sewer. It's what my area of expertise in. I've performed hundreds of rate studies at this point in my career. Have been working with the district for some time now, along with its consulting engineer, Mike Pierce, to understand the cost drivers behind providing quality water and sewer service to all the ratepayers within the district, which is an incredibly important job. I think water's, I think we can all agree, is very essential. So there's a lot going into this. So I'm going to get through this presentation, probably not quite as brief as that introduction there, but I'll try to get through it as efficiently as possible. As I mentioned, we did have a lot of work that went into this. I'm going to try to distill it down into a short presentation, hopefully giving you enough details. So before getting into that, I just wanted to set the stage of the purpose of a rate study, the purpose of a financial planning study, why we go through this analysis, why most water and sewer utilities do. It's to ensure the short and the long-term sustainability of the district. And that means having enough revenue on an annual basis to not only maintain operations, sustain operations, but improve operations throughout time, again, to keep up with that safety, that reliability of service for all the ratepayers. Unfortunately, water and sewer industry is incredibly capital intensive, which we'll talk about in a little bit in terms of the capital improvements plan and the different projects that the district is working on. But they're working on them for a good reason, to renew and replace that infrastructure in order to maintain that reliability and that safety and that high quality of service that the district deserves. The district is not alone in the boat that every other water and sewer utility is dealing with. The need for new and replacement infrastructure, increases in operating expenses, the inflation that we've been experiencing for the past couple of years is not just impacting us at our homes and our wallets and pocketbooks, it's also impacting water and sewer utilities and just general governments in general. So that's something we have to take into consideration when we're building this plan. And I'll get into a little bit of how we made that distinction between how much money needs to get generated on an annual basis in just a little bit. Something to note, the district has not had a rate increase in 2019. Here we are, since 2019. Here we are in 2024. So when we're talking about the increases that we are, just keep that into consideration, that the district has not had a rate increase in 2019. Another thing to keep in the back of your mind as we're talking about these rate changes and these increases, over the last 20 years or so across the country, water and sewer bills have gone up every single year by about 5 to 6% respectively, water and sewer, every single year across the country. So not having a rate increase since 2019 is a bit anomalous in terms of the overall increases that we're seeing. As Chris mentioned, a lot went on over that period of time. If not so much anomalous now, a lot of utilities were dealing with the struggles of COVID and how to deal with that and the pandemic and not wanting to raise rates or dealing with supply chain issues for capital improvements. A lot happened over the last few years that was quite honestly unpredictable, and I hope we never have to go through it again. Hope we're going to have some better predictions going forward. But just I wanted you to keep that in mind in terms of what the overall rate increases have been across the country. I'll talk a little bit about the financial plan. So the first step in this rate study process was trying to determine how much revenue needs to get generated on an annual basis to again sustain, maintain, and improve operations well into the future. We take into consideration the operating expenses, so the day-to-day just O&M or operation and maintenance expenses of the district, how we think those are going to change over time, again dealing with inflationary impacts, just everything's kind of getting more expensive. A key component of this, as well as most water and sewer utilities that are having to reinvest in their capital infrastructure in order to get water to folks' home and take that wastewater away in a clean and reliable way, is the capital improvements plan and how much money is being needed to be spent on an annual basis for these capital improvements, and maybe more importantly, how are we going to pay for those? And I'm going to get into that in a little bit. Some ways that we pay for them are generating cash on an annual basis at rates. For some longer term infrastructure, we might issue debt to be able to pay for those projects, just spread the payment out over a longer period of time and not overburden the ratepayers by having to generate a bunch of funds to pay for a very significant in terms of dollars, expensive project that's going to last a very long time. So it makes sense to issue some debt there. And the district has also done a great job of finding outside funds with some principal forgiveness and matching and grants. I really applaud the district. They've done a wonderful job of trying to go out and find as much outside funds as possible to mitigate the need for having to have rate increases on customers by finding as much money as possible that's coming out that we can use to offset the need for rate increases. I think the district probably has done a better job than most of my other clients in that regard, and so I applaud them for that. They've really done a great job. So by doing that, that kind of outlines, we look at a 5 to 10 year window of how much revenue needs to get generated annually to pay for those things, the operating expenses, the debt service associated with capital improvements, the cash funded needs of the capital improvements. We also look at things as reserve fund balances, more of the financial viability, if you will, of the district. Everybody in this room should have some sort of savings account for the rainy day, things that pop up. Water and sewer funds are no different. There could be a new capital improvement that pops up that we're not planning for. There could be a new regulation which seems to be coming out constantly that we would need to respond to and have to probably spend money on. Predominantly being a consumption-based revenue stream, where that is based on how much water customer is using. If we have a very cool, wet spring, summer, fall, consumption tends to decline during that period, and as such, the revenue tends to decline as well. And so by having a reserve fund balance, it allows the district to be able to mitigate that volatility and that volumetric revenue stream to a good degree, to where if we do see that down year, we don't have to alter from our plan, have a higher rate increase than what we're putting out there this evening, or deviate from significantly and potentially cause rate shock on customers. So we want to balance that as well, and you'll see that in a couple slides. And that kind of all indicates, if we were to do nothing in terms of your existing rate structure, which we are proposing alternatives, how much additional revenue is needed, and just kind of what I would refer to as across the board increases, X% more revenue on an annual basis to keep up with all those additional costs and capital improvements and that financial viability. So that went into how much. And I want to start, I do want to mention, I mentioned this earlier, we did work hand in hand for months now, it feels like, Jason, and with the district as a whole, and the district's consulting engineer, Wright Pierce, to understand the timing of projects, what additional funds are out there, the magnitude of those projects, so we can have, if we're projecting things 5 years from now, the only thing I can guarantee you is that what we're projecting 5 years from now will not come to fruition perfectly as we're projecting it. Things are just too volatile for that. But we want to predict with the best information we have today, and it was great working with the district and Wright Pierce in order to do that. We also held multiple workshops to go through different options of not only the revenue requirements or the costs of the capital improvements plan, and balance things to try to mitigate rate increases on customers. We looked at those customer impacts. We looked at different mechanisms for changing the rate structure, which we're going to get into later in the presentation, the rationale for doing so, with a strong focus on how that is impacting customers, as well as the financial sustainability of the district. And the culmination of all that is what we're going to go through here this evening. We'll start on the water side. I'll give you a bit of a water, the overview. These are revenue requirements or costs. I refer to revenue requirements as just the overall cost, the overall budget of the district, if you will. I'll just go through some of the high bullet points here. The water fund's revenue requirements are projected to increase by about 35% from 2023 to the year we're in now, 2024. This is largely due to necessary capital improvements and additional debt service that is coming on board to be able to pay for those capital improvements. Need to generate enough cash to be able to make those debt service payments, obviously. Over the course of the next 5 years, out through 2029, we're projecting that those costs on an annual basis will go up by about 6.4% on average over the forecast period. Again, something I'm going to say later in the presentation, you'll probably hear me say multiple times. This analysis should be, we are turning over a financial planning model to the district that they can use at their discretion. This should be updated annually, at least annually, with the best information we have, just to factor in any changes that might have, might happen over the next year that we weren't planning for today, just to make sure we're right in line with where we need to be. Speaking of those capital improvements, which is the biggest driver of the need for rate increases, district is expected to spend about $3.5 million on average annually in water capital improvements. A significant portion of that is the new well distribution system and just main replacements. Again, just renewal and replacement of infrastructure. District has not had a rate increase since 2019, and that I refer to retained earnings, or that cash reserve, or that savings account. The district's in a good financial position now with a lot of unknowns in terms of future capital and infrastructure, which is a good place to be. We want to be able to maintain that. We don't want to draw those reserves down. What a lot of communities do is they use their reserves to completely mitigate rate increases for a long period of time until they completely run out of money and they need 35 to 50% rate increases. That's the exact opposite of what we're trying to avoid here. We're trying to maintain enough sitting in that savings account, that reserve fund, such that when those capital improvements come that we can't quite see yet, that crystal ball is a little hazy going out too far, once that comes to a little bit of clarity, we're able to have enough revenue so we're not having to, again, significantly increase the revenue stream or the rates on the ratepayers. Just a bit of a CIP overview here. I'm an economist by trade, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not gonna go through this in a ton of detail, but you can kind of see here a lot of the work that the district is undertaking in terms of water main replacement, new well sources, and the last bullet point here that you can see on your screens I think is incredibly important. These slate of projects leverage 45 or greater than 45% net benefits, or $1 in principal forgiveness for every $1.50 the district spends. That's incredible. That is money that is coming in for the ratepayers that they are not on the hook for to reinvest in this infrastructure. That's incredible. There are many utilities, unfortunately, that I work with across New England who are not going out and looking for these outside funds, not looking for principal forgiveness or for grants, and they're requiring all that revenue to come from the backs of the ratepayers, and it's requiring significantly higher rate increases that would be necessary, contrary to what the district is doing, which is going out and finding these funds to benefit the ratepayers. So again, I commend them for that. Here is, I'll explain this chart. This is what I refer to as a cash flow. The bars on this chart are the revenue requirements, or the costs that need to be generated on an annual basis, broken out by different components. The dark blue is operating expenses, the general O&M, operation and maintenance expenses. The pink portion of the bar graph is your existing debt service obligations. The existing debt that the district has currently is having to pay on an annual basis, and the yellow is new debt service to pay for a lot of those capital improvements we just went through. So you can see that new debt service is jumping up significantly. But if the district were to pay for all of these projects out of cash, or had not found those outside funds, the principal forgiveness, the grants, that bar would be, I couldn't even fit it on this screen, it would be so high and require ridiculously high rate increases. So this is probably the most palatable and financially sufficient way to go at this point. The line here, the gray line going across with the diamonds in it, that is revenue under kind of existing rates, if you will, so if we don't have any rate increases. What you can see is we'd be okay for a couple years on the water side out through 2026, but then that debt service really starts coming up, and we would start running significant deficits to the point where once we get out to 2027, 28, 29, where that bar is, that line is significantly lower, the gap between where it is and the top of those bars, that is a deficit that the district would be running. And so if we go to this next slide, what you can see here is that water fund balance would start to precipitously go downward to the point where this is that target that we have here is an absolute bare minimum. We never want to get below it, and quite honestly, with the amount of capital improvements we have coming up, I don't even want to get close to that. I want to have a sufficient amount of reserve funds to be able to mitigate any future rate increases by maintaining these reserves. So this is an unpalatable situation to me, something that needs to get rectified in terms of rate increases. So I'll talk first about just the across-the-board rate increases, and then I'm going to get into sewer, and then I'll get into later in the presentation some of the structural changes that we're making to the rate structure itself. We're not recommending any additional revenue increase in 2024 on the water side, but then approximately 5% thereafter. This does also assume that you're going to start charging for private fire protection. This better aligns your cost recovery with cost causation. Any property, any account within the district that has a fire suppression system, there is a significant and meaningful cost associated with that to the district. The investment that they've already made, as well as the ongoing operating expenses, whether there is a fire or not, and hopefully there never is, but there's a cost associated with having a capacity in the system to be able to respond to a fire event. The infrastructure needs to be bigger. Everything needs to be scaled in such a way that it can respond to just people taking showers and flushing their toilets and drinking water and respond to a fire event at the exact same time. And there's a cost associated with that. And by recovering some of those costs associated with fire protection from those customers who are benefiting from it, it's a more equitable distribution of the revenues coming in the door, rather than requiring that to come from ratepayers, a lot of which do not have a fire suppression system and are not benefiting from those fire protection. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to go through some alternative rate structures a little bit later in this presentation, and we'll talk about what that means in terms of customer impacts and break that down into about 5 different customer categories. With those revenue increases, so instead of that gray line, that revenue kind of staying flat over the forecast period that we showed you before with no rate increases, we're kind of keeping that revenue right up with on the same trajectory as our costs are going up through 2029. And we can see that better indicated with that reserve fund balance kind of staying well above that bare minimum target. Again, setting ourselves up to when that crystal ball gets a lot more clear in the out years in terms of new capital improvements that are coming, new regulations. We're not sitting in a position where the district needs to have a double-digit rate increase, which is never fun for me to have to go to a rate hearing and propose to anybody. We don't want that. We want more stability in the rates. That's one of the goals here, is to have more smaller incremental increases annually rather than sharp fluctuations. That leads to rate shock. It leads to customers having a tougher time paying their bills if they're paying very low and then all of a sudden their bills go up 30%. That's a significant and meaningful increase, and we're trying to avoid that. We're also trying to have more revenue coming in for the district annually just to support the financial sufficiency and the financial health. And this is allowing us to do that. So I'll jump over to the sewer. Very similar talking points here, so I won't go into too much detail, but sewer fund overview, revenue requirements or the costs are projected to increase by about 28% from 2023 to 2024. A 6.4% increase kind of annually thereafter from 25 to 29. The sewer fund is spending about $1.12 million annually in capital improvements. And the biggest, again, very much like the water side, the biggest driver here is the need for that renewal and replacement of the capital improvements plan, and the infrastructure within the ground, the new debt service to be able to pay for these projects. Again, spreading that cost out over a long period of time, while at the same time leveraging the same principal forgiveness and grants that the district has done a great job of getting. Just like the water side, the sewer fund has not had a rate increase since 2019, and that the financial situation is a little worse spot if we don't have any rate increases over the next 5 years, and I'll show you that in just a second. CIP overview here, again, just pump station work, treatment plant work, sewer mains, taking the wastewater away. A lot of work is being done by the district, rightfully so, to be able to, again, have that reliability of service. I don't know if anybody's ever had a backup in their home or other wastewater issues. It could be just as bad as not having water in your house or having brown water. It's actually worse in my opinion. We're trying to avoid these things, and the district is doing a great job working with its consulting engineer to understand the status of the infrastructure and the need for renewal and replacement, getting ahead of it. I can't tell you how many times, I know I feel like I'm patting you all on the back, but I think you are doing a fantastic job. I can't tell you how many times I work with a utility or a community that just kicks the can down the road, and they just put Band-Aids over all their infrastructure. They don't reinvest the way that they need to, and they wait until the absolute last minute when things are more expensive. They're having catastrophic failures, breaks, emergency issues. All that just leads to more money being required for those emergency repairs, are significantly more expensive. It might be saving them some money in the short term, but them setting themselves up for financial and infrastructure failure in the long term. I think this is one of the most sustainable and proactive and prudent things that a utility can do, is reinvest in its infrastructure on a regular basis rather than delaying and inevitably paying more and potentially leading to quality concerns. So here, similar to the water side, except we're running deficits very quicker because of that new debt service. Our revenue's not coming in. It's such a high amount on the water side. Right in 2024, without any rate increases, and through the remainder of the forecast, the sewer fund without any rate increases would generate a deficit. This is very unpalatable, and we can see that here with that sewer fund balance dropping well below our bare minimum target by 2029, the end of our forecast period. Again, this would give me a lot of heartburn. I would probably, I don't sleep well already, but I would certainly lose more sleep over if you were in a financial position like this. We cannot allow this to happen. So similar on the water, similar like on the water side, we are recommending a across the board increases of about 3% in 2024, with 7% thereafter for 2025 to 2028. And we do have alternative rate designs that we're going to talk about on the sewer side as well. That sewer cash flow, as you can see, we're not completely getting that revenue up to those expenses, the top of them, but we are keeping pace with the increases in the revenue requirements on an annual basis. And you can see here on that reserve fund balance, again, staying right where we need to be to have that financial sufficiency, that financial viability to be able to respond to any of those unknowns that are coming, again, to mitigate rate increases on customers going forward. So I want to get into now some of the actual rates themselves, the rate structure, and what that means in terms of different customer types. Because we could talk about percentages all day, and we could talk about the structural changes, but what does that mean actually in dollars and cents in terms of bills? So I want to get into that, but first I'm going to set the stage of what the recommended rate structural changes are and why. First and foremost, one of the biggest rate structural changes, which I spoke to the district about immediately upon looking at the rate structure, was scaling the fixed charges based on meter size, rather than just having a flat charge, whether you are the smallest customer in the district or the largest customer in the district. They're paying the same flat charge or fixed charge. That's an anomaly in the industry. What is industry best practice is to scale those fixed charges based on the size of the meter. And what that does is it reflects the additional capacity of a larger meter than a smaller meter. So a typical single-family residential home has a 5/8 inch or 3/4 meter. A much larger institutional or commercial property might have a 4 or 6 inch meter. That 4 to 6 inch meter can push a lot more water through it. And so that additional capacity, there's a cost associated with that. Just like I talked about on the fire protection side, there's a capacity-related cost to respond to a fire event. Hopefully it never happens. There's still a capacity-related cost associated with being able to deliver vast amounts of water to these customers with larger meter sizes. Whether they're using water or not, the capacity in the system is still there. So we're scaling that to where the larger meter sizes are paying more, which is, I think, more equitable and also based on industry best practices. You can see here on the bottom chart here, the two pie charts. The one on the left is the customer makeup, which you can see is predominantly residential, the darker blue or teal. I'm not great with colors. Call that teal. The teal color there is predominantly residential, but when we look on the consumption side, it's only making up about 17% of the total consumption. Whereas if we look back to the customer profile, maybe about 15% or so is institutional in terms of the actual accounts themselves or the properties or customers. But when we look at the consumption profile, how much water they're using almost half of the total consumption of the district. So a lot fewer customers, but a lot more consumption, and that is further reflective of the additional demand and capacity needed to service these larger customers. As I mentioned earlier, we are also recommending charging private fire protection or private fire suppression system based on line size. This is also industry best practice. There is a meaningful cost associated with having the ability to respond to a fire event, and it is industry best practice for a utility to recover those costs from those customers benefiting from it. It's inequitable, in my opinion, to not have those customers who have a fire suppression system not pay something, because then it's getting spread amongst all the ratepayers on the water side who do not benefit from having that private fire suppression system. If we looked at what the district could recover in terms of its overall revenue stream, in terms of fire protection, given the size of the infrastructure, the size of this district service area, it could be about 40% of the overall revenue, which is meaningful. I think that indicates how meaningful these costs are to be able to support fire protection. It is standard to include we want to include, or at least consider, both a public fire protection and a private fire protection component. We're focusing here mostly on the private fire protection side. It's pretty actually uncommon in the industry for there to be explicit public fire protection charges. It's much more common to have only private fire protection charges. And so we're implementing those, or at least recommending them here this evening, to reflect that additional capacity for those accounts that do have suppression systems. The public fire protection costs, which we go in and do what I refer to as a cost of service analysis to parse out the total fire protection between public and private, those costs associated with providing public fire protection for the entirety of the district, which everybody benefits from, are going to get picked up from the base charges of those fixed charges, which I'll get to in just a second and show you how those are changing. And we're also not recommending a private hydrant fee, just given the interest of the public having private hydrants to be able to put out a fire if that's the case. So that you'll see that on the slide. We are also maintaining the volumetric revenue system right now, which gives 5,000 gallons per quarter within the fixed charge. So if you don't use more than 5,000 gallons, you're just paying that fixed charge. It's not until you go above 5,000 gallons that you start paying a volumetric charge per 1,000 gallons. We are maintaining that system here. We have had some discussions about removing that minimum allowance. There are significant customer impacts associated with that, especially for lower volume customers. We think it makes sense, just given that more than half of the users consume less than a quarter of the water in total for the year. It makes sense to not disproportionately impact those lower volume customers by removing that allowance, while at the same time we want to maintain the amount of revenue we have coming from those fixed charges for revenue stability purposes. If you remember back to earlier in the presentation, I talked about that potential volatility in the consumption, which leads to volatility in revenue. We can offset that with having adequate reserve fund balances, but we can also offset that by having a good portion of our revenue coming from fixed charges. So we don't want to remove that component, but we also want to recognize that if we completely remove that minimum allowance, it would have a significant impact on lower volume customers, which we are very sensitive of, and we don't want to do anything to counteract that. So the volumetric structure itself is largely staying intact. Speaking of the recovery of volumetric and fixed, because of that stability, it does make sense to try to increase the amount of revenue coming from fixed charges. If we looked at the actual cost structure of the district, somewhere probably around 90% of your costs are fixed, give or take 5% or so. I would never recommend to the district to have 90% of its revenue coming from fixed. It would make me very happy because it would be a very stable and predictable revenue stream, but it would be very inequitable in that it would charge very high volume customers pretty much the same as very low volume customers, and it wouldn't have that linkage between cost causation and cost recovery. So we have what is more of a capacity related component dealing with meters, billing, administration, customer service, public fire protection, and a little bit of capacity. We're trying to recover in that fixed charge, which we do want to bolster a little bit to recover those costs and also enhance the revenue stability, but we don't want to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum because it would have such an impact on low volume customers. And you can see here on the right side of the screen, this box here, which I should have outlined, I apologize. You can see different customer types, a small user, a large user. The percentage of their bill that is made up by that fixed charge is disproportionately shifted to low volume customers. So a customer for its commensurate meter size, if they use a very low amount of water, a greater portion of their bill is made up by the fixed charge. If they're using a lot more water, they might be paying more in terms of their overall bill because they're paying more in that volumetric revenue stream or rate structure. But the portion of their bill that is coming from that fixed charge is much smaller as they're using more water. So if we disproportionately increase that fixed charge even more, although it would be great from revenue stability purposes, it would not be great from the purposes of customer impacts, it would more disproportionately hurt those lower volume customers, which is not what we're trying to accomplish here. Currently, the district's recovering about 20% of its rate-related revenue from fixed charges. Given some of that volatility we see, it was one of my recommendations to go up on that a little bit. Obviously not to the far end of the spectrum, 90%, but it is our recommendation to go up to about 30% of your revenue coming from those fixed charges, which is right in line with when we survey rate structures across the country, or revenue recovery rather, from utilities across the country. It's right in line with kind of the median or the typical of what we see. And so we think that's a very strong rationale for doing so, again, to slightly increase the revenue stability of the district, while at the same time not disproportionately impacting those lower volume customers, which we're trying to avoid here. Take some water. So we'll look at the rates themselves. I'll start with the volumetric and the fixed charges, or those minimum charges. The volumetric rates, the structure itself is, like I mentioned, is staying exactly the same, in that the first 5,000 gallons are included in the minimum charge or the fixed charge, and then it's not until somebody goes above that 5,000 gallon threshold that they start paying this volumetric rate. And in this case, most customers, unless it's a senior exemption, will pay $11.72 in 2024 per 1,000 gallons above that 5,000 gallon threshold, compared to what they're currently paying of $12.97. Same decrease on the senior consumption from $11.68 down to $10.55. And then those minimum charges, here's where I was talking about before. What the district is currently doing is, it doesn't matter if it's the smallest customer in the system, a single family residential home with a 3/4 inch meter, they're paying $62.50 per quarter for that fixed charge. It doesn't matter if that customer or the largest customer in your system with an 8-inch meter, still paying $60.50. That does not align cost recovery with cost causation. That's not equitable, in my opinion, nor is it based on industry best practices. So what we are recommending is that the fixed charges should be scaled based on meter size, which you can see bolded on the far right portion of this chart, is that the fixed charges will start to increase as the meter size gets larger, to reflect that additional capacity associated with a larger meter size than a smaller meter size. Here are the proposed private fire protection charges, again, which are currently based on, similar to the base charges, are just equivalent, the same based no matter on the fire line size itself, which does have additional capacity for larger line sizes. It is based on industry best practices to have those charges differentiated by line size. So that is what we're recommending here. So as we go from a 1.5-inch fire protection system up to a 8-inch fire protection system, you can see those charges increasing accordingly to reflect that additional capacity. And then, as I mentioned before, just given the public concern here and public safety, that private fire hydrant charge is going to zero, or is proposed to go to zero. Bear with me, we're getting through this. The proposed sewer rates themselves, very similar to the water side. Same exact volumetric rate structure, the same 5,000 gallon usage allowance. Not until you get above that are you going to start paying on a volumetric stream. The volumetric rates themselves are coming down actually in 2024 compared to what they were in 2023. And then those fixed charges going up slightly for the 3/4 inch meter, the typical single family residential home, and then increasing based on those differentials that I mentioned earlier to have a more equitable stream and reflect that additional capacity. Just like on the water side, it's industry best practices to do so. Very much industry best practices to have fixed charges on the sewer side as well. If we look at survey data across the country, the vast majority, 90% of utilities that have a fixed charge, have that fixed charge structured by meter size rather than just having a flat charge, which you have today. So I think this is a good recommendation and something that's going to, again, bring more equity into the system. These charts are going to get a little repetitive, so please bear with me here. I'm going to go through about 5 of them of different customer types because of the structural changes. Now, if we just had your exact same rate structure today and we said sewer rates are going up 3%, everybody's going to experience a 3% increase. It's going to differ based on the dollar amounts, but it's going to be 3%. Because we're changing the structure itself, dependent upon the type of customer that you are, the meter size that you have, whether you have a private fire suppression system and how much water you're using, customers are going to experience different customer impacts associated with those structural changes. So I'm going to start here with a typical volume, just single-family residential household using about 9,000 gallons per quarter, has a 3/4 inch meter with no fire protection suppression system. This is a combined bill on an annual basis, and combined I mean both water and sewer. This customer is currently paying about $1,158, and with the rate structural changes we're talking about here, that same customer's bill would go up to $1,188. That's about a $30 increase per year, a $7.50 increase per quarter, or if we broke it down per month, it's a $2.50 increase for both water and sewer combined per month increase. And that's about a 2.5% increase for that customer. And if you think back to, I think it was my second slide, water and sewer bills have been going up by about 5 or 6% every single year for the last 20 years across the country. And the district has not had a rate increase since 2019. And we're talking about a 2.5% increase here on the majority of customers within the system, mostly those typical single-family residential homes. A typical volume senior household using less water than a typical household, just based on the data that we're seeing, about 5,000 gallons per quarter, same 3/4 inch meter with no fire suppression system. This customer is currently paying about $630 per year for water and sewer service combined. With the rate structures we're talking about here, that would go up to about $700. I know this is slightly higher on a percentage increase, but that is predominantly due to that fixed charge, as we're increasing that fixed charge from recovery of 20% to 30%, because the senior customers are paying, are using on average less than a typical single-family residential home. That fixed charge is making up a greater portion of their bill, but they are still getting a discount compared to every other just normal residential customer within the system by a meaningful amount. If you remember back to let's go to the water rates here. Instead of paying $71 for a fixed charge, it's only $64 for a fixed charge. Instead of paying $11.72 per 1,000 gallons, a senior exemption customer would pay $10.55. So they are getting that discount already compared to most other customers. I just wanted to point that out when we look at that increase. And it's about $5.80 per month for combined water and sewer service for this customer. If we look at a large multifamily property using about 50,000 gallons per year with a 1-inch meter and a 2-inch private fire suppression line, so this is where we're introducing some of those new fire suppression systems. This customer is currently paying about $5,850 per year for water, sewer, and fire combined today. With the increases and the recommended rate structural changes we're talking about, that would increase the same customer's bill to approximately $6,141. That's about $290 more per year, $73 or so more per quarter, or about $24 per month, and that equates to approximately a 4.7% increase for water, sewer, and fire protection across the board. I told you this was going to get repetitive, sorry. Commercial customer using about 250,000 gallons per quarter, 2-inch meter with a 6-inch, so a much larger fire suppression system. This customer is paying about $29,000 per year for water, sewer, and fire suppression in total for the entire year. With the increases we're talking about, this same commercial customer would go up to about $30,700 or so. It's about a $1,900 per year increase, $480 per quarter, $161 per month, or what equates to about a 6.3% increase for this customer. The primary driver here is this customer having a 2-inch meter as we're scaling those fixed charges to reflect the equity in the system, as well as having a 6-inch fire suppression, which we're also scaling based on size to reflect the capacity and the equity in the system. And so this customer is seeing a little bit higher of an increase than we saw in the prior customer examples. And then if we go to my final customer impact slide, if we look at an institutional customer, largest customer in the system, using about 450 gallons per quarter, a 3-inch meter, even a larger meter than we looked at on the commercial side, and again a 6-inch private line. This customer is paying about $52,000 per year for water, sewer, and fire suppression currently, and it would go up to about $55,000 or so, or about a 6% overall increase of 3 components combined. or a monthly increase of about $271. Again, higher than that single-family residential home, going up about 2.5%, somewhere in that range. The reason being is because of the larger meter size, because of the larger fire suppression system. We're building some more equity in the rate structure itself and the revenue recovery, shifting the costs associated with that capacity for fixed charges as well as fire suppression to the customers who are benefiting from them, and taking it away from the customers who are not benefiting from having that additional capacity or having that fire suppression. Couple more slides here and I'll wrap up. So bear with me. I thank you for your patience thus far. A little bit of a financial outlook and where we go from here. Obviously, this does not end this process. As I mentioned earlier, the district should reanalyze this on at least an annual basis just to understand what is changing. Does the capital improvement shift out? Did your customer profile change? Is revenue coming in better than you thought it was? Hopefully that's the case. Knock wood anyway. We want to keep up with those changes and just make sure we're on path. A financial plan or rate plan is not something that's just written in stone. It is very much a living, breathing document that should be updated as frequently as needed to reflect the changes, and that's just going to allow the district to be a little bit more financially flexible and not need to deviate from its plan too significantly or lead to rate shock for its customers. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the primary goals here is to set the district up in a strong financial position to where they can have smaller magnitude, more programmatic annual increases in rates, rather than not have a rate increase for 5 years and then see a significant rate increase because the can was just kicked down the road. We get to the point where we need significant amount of additional revenue. This we found with just customer surveys and talking to customers that they are rather have smaller increments of increases annually and see those bills go up on an annual basis, smaller amounts, rather than delay and have a significant increase in the 5th year. All other components of a household expenditures are going up typically annually. It's reasonable to assume, and it's something that is palatable, that can be planned for, and something that we think is industry best practice, and it's a strong recommendation from us. Also, continuing to think about full cost pricing and equitable pricing within the rate structure itself to make sure that you are generating enough revenue annually to pay fully for your costs. Again, I talked about a lot of my clients who will just kick the can down the road and they're not generating enough revenue that they need to reinvest in the system. It might be a short-term fix, but it is leading to long-term catastrophe. So we want to make sure that our revenues are coming in every single year to pay for the expenses necessary. Nobody in this room is getting rich off of water and sewer rate increases. This money is directly going back into the system to benefit ratepayers, to have that reliability, that clean, and that safe service. We need to make sure that's the case. And we also, when we're recovering that full cost, we want to make sure we're doing so in such a way that is as equitable as possible. There is no perfectly equitable rate structure in the water and sewer industry, unfortunately. California gets close. They charge individual customers different rate structures every month. It changes. It's a nightmare and not something that I think we're ever going to see here in New England. But we want to get as equitable as possible in the overall recovery of those costs to reflect that additional capacity of the fixed charges, to reflect the additional capacity of the fire suppression, to reflect the additional demand that these larger volume customers are placing on the system compared to a low volume customer. We want to continue to balance that and make changes as necessary as we step through our project, as the annual financial plan. And then I said this again, I think the district is already doing a great job of this, just asset management, keeping up with infrastructure, knowing where your infrastructure is, how old it is, when it needs to be renewed and replaced, not waiting until something breaks and then you're dealing with an emergency repair that's potentially leading to reliability issues or water quality issues or backups in sewer backups in homes. You're taking a more programmatic approach, which might cost a little bit more money in the short term, but it's going to save the district money in the long term, save the ratepayers money, and also allow for that reliability and that safety of service to never be compromised, rather than just delaying the inevitable. So last slide here, and I will finally stop talking, turn it over for questions or comments. What have we done? So we have, again, gone through the entirety process. We've had multiple workshops with the district, gone through a lot of different scenarios together, came up with this that we presented this evening. I think is a really good package. It's a culmination of a lot of great work. I thank the district for sticking with me and working through a lot of these different things. It's not an easy process to go through. It's not something we want to do hastily. We want to put a lot of good time and effort, and the district has certainly done that. So we finalized our rate recommendations based on all that work that we did and this presentation that we just went through. What's next? We want to communicate with you, and that's why hopefully there's people out there, and thank you for coming this evening. We're communicating this and telling people what we're trying to do and why. We're not trying to pull, the district is not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. They are very much doing this for the benefit of the ratepayers, and we want to make sure to communicate that. It's when customers don't understand why additional revenue is needed, what that revenue is going to pay for, why the rate structure is set up the way that it is. I think the district has done a great job of trying to communicate that and put this in a way that people can understand what the rates that they're actually paying and why things are changing over time and the benefit associated with that. And then I'll say it one last time, these things should be updated annually again to just keep up with any changes that might occur. That being said,
Ed.
Thank you, Dave.
thank you for your patience. Hopefully that wasn't too bad.
I bet you're very photogenic, and this will be uploaded on the web pretty quickly.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Dave, once again, for
pleasure.
helping us on this it's been a couple of years now. We're appreciative that this is wrapped up and we all feel comfortable and good about where we're going with both a short-term and a long-term plan for the district. Questions? Elaine? Yes?
I do have a question.
Yes?
Could there be some sort of documentation mailed out in the next water and sewer bills to let people know about this gentleman, everything that's going on? Or did it already come out and I missed it?
Do you have something on the website as of this moment? Were we planning on,
Is there anything you can insert in the bills?
we tend to put, I think in the past we've tended to put some brief message in with the
There's a
mail
spot in
bills.
the bills
Okay.
that can have a brief message, or
Right.
we could do some
I
sort
think a
of.
lot of people don't bother to go on the website.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, there's, as Dave was pointing out, there's not a simple answer. It's not like we just
Sure,
raised it X%.
yep.
There's a bigger story there, so.
Well, maybe we can give them the rate card, the one
Could
that
it
we
be
have.
summarized
Presentable,
with a short
yeah.
paragraph
Right,
or
a
whatever?
brief explanation
Yeah,
of the
just a
actual.
brief
yeah.
explanation so people know.
Right. No, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, we can just hit the high notes and some
Yeah,
bullet
yeah,
points.
exactly. No, well, too much and they're not gonna read it.
Yeah, it's gotta be short and sweet.
Yeah, exactly,
Yep.
short and sweet.
Is there anything else?
No,
Okay,
Are there anybody in the Zoom?
I didn't see anybody.
Where's Mary Ann tonight?
Yeah,
Not
she's
here.
not here, okay.
Probably working at the polls, like,
Yeah.
Oh, probably.
Hey, so I'll make a motion that we close up the rate hearing,
Second,
okay? And make a motion, we open, all in favor, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Yep, aye?
All those in favor, aye as well, okay. So at about 8 minutes of 6, the rate hearing for our budget for 2024 is now closed. All right, so pursuant to RSA 33:8A, we now open a budget hearing on proposed bonding or borrowing in excess of $100,000. So on our warrant for this March, we have 2 articles. Article 2 is, I'll go over each of these individually, we'll discuss them individually. Article 2 is to see if the district will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $2,150,000 for the purpose of replacing water and sewer lines for Avery Street, Cummings Street, and Pleasant Street. $1,700 for water main replacement, and $450,000 for sewer infrastructure upgrades. And to authorize the commissioners to enter into a loan agreement with the New Hampshire Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund for $1,700,000, and to pass any vote related thereto, and further to authorize the commissioners to apply for, receive, and expend other federal and state grants that may be available. This article is contingent upon the district receiving the loan, subject to the terms and conditions described herein. An important note is we have, part of this is the opportunity for 70% principal forgiveness on the water side of this project. which would reduce the total obligation to what, like 940 or 950,000.
Yeah.
So there's, once again, we have this significant opportunity here from, in the form of principal forgiveness. And it is hard to pass up dollars coming into this community when, you know, we have so many expensive projects that we need to undertake. So we do encourage the passing of this article. Any questions, Elaine? No questions there. Let's go on to Article 3. This is to see if the district will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $756,000 for the purpose of developing a solar array and to authorize the commissioners to enter into a loan and a grant agreement with the New Hampshire Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund for up to $756,000, with not less than $200,000 from New Hampshire DES Energy Audit Measure Implementation Grant Program, and to authorize the commissioners to expend such monies as they become available, and to pass any vote relating thereto, and furthermore to authorize the commissioners to apply for, receive, and expend and other federal and state grants that may become available. This article, once again, is contingent on the district receiving the loan subject to the terms and conditions described herein. The good news here on this front is that we have significant funding. Yes, right. Thank you for the synopsis here. We have a $200,000 NHDES energy grant, one-to-one matching grant, a 30% federal energy base incentive, which amounts to $226,800, 10% domestic content bonus incentive, $75,600, and then a 20% based incentive, MHI based incentive of $151,200, which brings the district's total obligation down to $102,400 for this solar array. This is not our first array, and we believe what the payback on this is something like 1
Dave
year.
has a long drive, so say goodbye to Dave.
Thank you again, Dave.
Good presentation,
Yes.
thank you.
Have a great evening, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's about a 2 to 3 year return.
2 to 3 year return, okay. Nonetheless, this is, for our total obligation, we have the opportunity here to have a significant energy generator for us, solar powered. And this is all going on the
The wastewater
on
treatment
the
plant.
wastewater plant, yes.
Oh, these are all on the wastewater plant, this isn't the distributed ones around to the pump stations, et cetera?
Yes, there will be some pump stations,
There will be some pump
Yep.
stations, okay.
but the majority will be at the wastewater plant.
Yeah, Jason did a great job going after these subsidies, I mean, it's just incredible
Yeah, no, I
how
think,
much money is available
yeah,
out there.
once again, I think this is a huge, would be a huge benefit and cost offset for our rather high electric bills. We got a lot of multi-horsepower motors, which despite the fact we've upgraded them, we still consume a lot of electricity.
Yeah,
To move water
typically
around.
water and wastewater facilities are the largest consumer of electricity in a community.
Right.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So we do encourage voting yes on both of these articles. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but when you said on this Article 3 of all the additional monies that you're anticipating receiving to offset that,
Yes.
how are people gonna know that?
Well, I mean, the language that's written into the warrant article is highly prescribed by the state, so,
Okay,
you know,
average Joe Schmo, I'm thinking average homeowner.
well, I mean, when it comes time on election night, when we have our meeting,
Yeah.
we explain it in the same way that I'm
Okay,
doing it
good.
now, yes. So, but as far as the language that's used here in the article, yeah,
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of leeway in how that's presented. So,
Very good.
without any, if there are no other
We're not
questions,
under requirement, we don't have to keep this open for an hour or anything
Yeah.
like that, the
No.
total is just,
Not on these.
then I
projects.
move that we move out of the hearing for the other projects.
second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we'll say at 6 PM, we close the hearing on the proposed bonding or borrowing. Which brings us on to the rest of what's on the agenda this evening. I'd say next up, old business, important dates. So we do have January 24th through February 2nd, candidates are able to file for the position of commissioner, also for the position of clerk for the district, and then for moderator. March 12th is our local election day, and then March 14th is our annual meeting here in this office at 6 p.m. So,
We have a commissioner, we have a clerk, we don't have a treasurer? I thought
We
the
do have-
Bob
we
was the
current-
treasurer.
The treasurer is an appointed position.
The treasurer's an appointed position?
that's correct, yes.
So, and the clerk is Barbara?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes,
Yep.
okay, thank you.
but those positions are open to anyone who
Yeah.
wants to run for those
Anyone
positions.
within the district.
Within the
Yeah.
district, yes, thank you. Okay, next up would be superintendent reports. Jason?
Just briefly want to report that our new hire started today, and
Great.
our injured employee has returned to work as well, so we
Oh.
are now
Good.
fully staffed at this time.
Well,
Great.
that's good news, because we've been operating with a little less than full staff, and I know it's been a challenge for all of you. We have a couple of purchase recs which have been previously approved, but we need to enter these into the record. We have O'Reilly Auto for $760.70. Witcher Rubbish Removal, $1,560. And then Maltz Sales Company, total of $579.65. Do I have a motion there to enter those into the record?
I make a motion, we enter those into the record?
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that is done. Public comment?
The
Right.
investment policy was added as kind of an afterthought. but
Right. So we need a motion here to, this is the same, the investment policy is unchanged from last year. This is a requirement of the district that we have such a policy. So,
The auditors are looking for the updated.
right,
copy.
so I make a motion that we approve for 2024 this investment policy as carried forward from last year.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we'll get you to sign that. Next meeting is scheduled for February 13th, here in this office, 5 p.m. And I believe that is everything.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn at 3 minutes after 6.